Welcome to Talk Gnosis. I'm sorry that Bishop Ken Canterbury can't be with me tonight, but we have a very special guest this evening, the Reverend Shawna Atteberry, who is an author, speaker, and feminist theologian. She's also my best friend forever. And our topic this evening is why women flee mainstream churches and why women become attracted to alternative religious movements, Gnosticism being one, perhaps, but also various types of neo-paganism and other earth-based religions. So welcome, Shawna.
Thank you.
Now, many observers of modern religion have noted the departure of women from mainstream and evangelical churches in order to pursue involvement with other alternative religious groups. Why do you think that this is?
Well, I think a large part of it is because we feel subhuman and like second-class citizens. Evangelical churches are still squabbling over whether or not women should be ordained or even lead in positions where they're teaching men.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the mainline churches, like I'm in, that ordain women, and we have women at all levels of leadership. When we go to church, we constantly hear God referred to as He, King, Father. So we never hear God imaged as a woman. We rarely hear God as mother or midwife or referred to as she or the queen. And so when we hear the wonderful verse in Genesis that both man and women are created in the image of God, but we only have male images for God in our worship, does that mean we're really human?
Yeah, and I think that you make an interesting point there because Christianity is a very large group of people, and there are various denominations and sects. Some are very conservative on women's issues, some are quite liberal, but there's still women departing at all levels. In all the different denominations, you see women who are departing, arguing that they are unhappy with the way they're being treated. And within the evangelical churches, it does tend to, departures tend, it seems to me, to be rest on the issues of authority within the family as well as in the church. But as you point out, even in those churches where women are in leadership at every single level, even the presiding bishop, in some cases, women will still depart because of God language.
Yes.
And
and well, it's interesting. As you know, I was at a conference about a week and a half ago. I'm a member of a group called Christian Feminism Today, and we had our biannual conference a week and a half ago. And several of the women at the conference have stopped going to church or don't go to church on a regular basis because of all the male God language they hear when they're there. So I found it, and as you know, at times I stopped going to church off and on for the same reason. Even though I love my church, I love my priest, the liturgy gets on my nerves, and I have to have a break from it every now and then.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. That for many women, there still remains this tension, even if they're considered to be equal. The language and the worship itself may not feel right if it is not inclusive.
Yeah.
And what we're worshiping is consistently imaged as male.
Yes.
And if you look at, for example, various neo-pagan churches, or groups, I should say, not churches, covens and other organizations, you have goddesses.
Yes.
Either one goddess or many goddesses, but there's
or a good balance. I like a good balance. I think one of the reasons I'm attracted to Wicca is because they have all of these gorgeous images, male, female, and also neutral images for God. So
yeah, there's that. And I mean, I've studied a little bit of Norse paganism, and it's just wonderful because you have these women who are can be every bit as troublesome as their male counterparts as the gods. So, but you actually have.
Oh no, go ahead. Oh no, I say I'm partial to the Celtic pantheon, and the Celtic goddesses are the same way. They're rabble rousers and cause just as much trouble as their male counterparts. So.
And you also have the ability to associate a little bit, I think, sometimes with the god or the goddess that speaks to you, and that you can identify a lot more with, and you can have multiple deities that you can interact with. So I think for many people who, as you point out, have a problem with a one God that's imaged in one way, the ability to pick and choose some deities who are not always male, who are not necessarily male or female. Some are androgynous. Has a lot of appeal for people.
Yeah. Well, and I think also a good age span too, because we just think of God the Father, and Jesus is kind of a middle-aged guy, but there's nobody there that's really young or really old, and so I think you have more of a draw too, that you have gods that are teenagers and are like the typical goddess, maiden, mother, and crone that cover all areas of life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And and in Gnosticism, for example, there is the notion of Sophia, who is wisdom, and we also have kind of a different take on the creation story, in which you have kind of a unity, and the splitting off of male and female is not necessarily seen as God's will, or as the will of the unknown God. And one of the things that I've observed, in fact, it was just today, I was reading an internet comment by a gentleman who basically argued that Christianity is absolutely patriarchal, and cited the fact that in that we have an understanding in Genesis that woman was created for the benefit of man. Yes. And therefore this is a divinely ordained role for women to be supportive of men, and that women can't have their own agendas, their own lives. And it occurred to me, well, there's the Gnostics take a slightly different tack on that. that this kind of division was not really supposed to happen here. So I think that's why some of these mythologies, and I say that in a very positive way when I use the term mythology, have a lot more appeal to women, even women who are in churches that are very inclusive with women's leadership. It goes beyond leadership. There's an issue of theology.
Yes.
And liturgy, and these things that that are more difficult to wrestle with. You can have a church that absolutely says women can be priests and ministers and bishops, but if the theology is still very male, many women are going to feel disenfranchised.
Yes, and they do. I experienced that a week and a half ago, so.
I can imagine that.
Now, but back to the Gnostic creation myth, where the split wasn't supposed to happen or seen as a good thing, that also opens the door for people who don't identify as totally male or female. That includes, that gives you some gender fluidity as well. Whereas when you read the biblical text, God created them male and female, and there's not a whole lot in between. So I think that would appeal to people who are trans or gender identify not with the body they're born in as well. I think that would be attractive to them.
And individuals with intersex conditions as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was once at an event. It was a panel discussion on homosexuality in the church. It was at a very conservative evangelical event, and an intersex individual was there. And it was, basically this individual fortunately was able to find a church where they didn't have a very sophisticated understanding of intersex issues, but this individual was able to be accepted in that church. But there were people at this event who had Bibles in hand and wanted to tell this individual how she was expected to relate for the rest of her life as a gendered person, when that was just not the case.
Yeah.
And so I can definitely see where that, a Gnostic myth where you have something that's saying, well, maybe this split wasn't such a great idea.
Yeah.
That could have a lot of meaning for people who would still perhaps like to stay at least loosely within the Christian mythos, but the Gnostic approach can have a little twist.
Yeah. I guess you room to breathe. I mean, that's basically what it does. So.
Yeah. Basically, we're going to take a different view on this, and we can go from there. Now, one thing, you've been ordained, and I know you served as pastor of churches, and just because women in the pews have their own experiences, but even in, as you noted, even in denominations that do encourage female leadership, sexism still happens, including women clergy experience sexism.
Oh,
as well.
yes. Yes.
And do you think that's why some female clergy decide to say bye-bye?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think there's only so many times you can knock your head up against the same wall. So,
Yeah.
well, which is why I left the evangelical movement.
Yeah.
There's 8 verses in the Bible that limit women's leadership. It's the minority witness, and I wasn't going to spend the rest of my career arguing about those 8 verses. And and 10 years later, after I've left the movement, guess what? They're still arguing about those 8 verses. So. Yeah, you get tired of fighting the same fights and covering the same ground and feeling like you're not getting anywhere.
And the funny thing is, you were originally ordained in a church that ordained women from the very beginning.
Yes, yeah. The Church of the Nazarene was established in 1903 and ordained women from the very beginning.
And yet it, as time went on, the topic of women's ordination became in many ways, I think, more contentious.
Yeah, well, they're on the upswing again. What happened is the Church of the Nazarene, along with most of the evangelical movement, bought into the fundamental backlash in the 50s and 60s. Because in the 1930s and early 40s, 30% of clergy in the Church of the Nazarene were women.
Huh?
And in fact, our largest church in Little Rock, Arkansas, that ran 3,000 people, the pastor was a woman, Reverend Agnes Diffie, who also had the first radio televangelist show in the nation.
Wow.
And so, but as I was leaving, I didn't so much leave the Church of the Nazarene as I did the evangelical movement, because I wanted to write theology as well as pastor, and I couldn't do the theology I wanted to do there.
Sure.
But no, when I was on my way out, our numbers were climbing. The women ordained in the Church of the Nazarene were climbing back up, and half of the ministerial students at our national seminary, Nazarene Theological Seminary in Kansas City, were women. So I didn't leave because of the pastoral concerns, because actually I never had a bad experience as a female pastor in the Church of the Nazarene. I left for theological reasons and to write the books that I wanted to write without having to cover the same ground again and again and again.
It's interesting, because I think sometimes people, whether they're gay or women or whatever, if they feel like if they're in a marginalized group, they can't necessarily feel like they can specialize in an area of ministry or study that's not related to that group. If they feel like they constantly have to bang their head against the wall and defend themselves, that is going to get wearing.
Yeah. And I have had friends, I do, not to say the experience on the Nazarene Church is good overall, because I had friends who had bad experiences.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the main reason for me to leave. And plus, I know women in mainline churches who have left the ministry because they hit what we call the stained glass ceilings.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can be an associate pastor at a church of over 500, but don't think about trying to become the senior pastor type thing. So.
Or you end up as a senior pastor of a rural congregation with 20 members, which, not to say that isn't a very valuable position or a very important work, but it may not be what a female pastor's strengths and gifts are.
Yes.
But they're not going to send her off to one of the leading congregations to be senior pastor.
No.
I've periodically in the ministry have dealt with some issues. One person asked me if I wrote a sermon myself, as if somebody else was actually writing it for me.
Oh my goodness, you're kidding!
Yeah, came up to me and said, "That was a really good sermon. Did you write it yourself?"
Oh my God!
Yeah,
that's horrible.
Well, and I've actually had people, after officiating at a wedding, question my authority to officiate at the wedding. It's and one guy after service said, "Oh, they're letting women be ministers now."
Oh my goodness!
And this was a very progressive congregation, so it was kind of funny. But you get that sort of thing happening. But I think it can create some issues, and maybe sometimes people get sick of controversy after a while.
Oh yeah, you get burnt out. Yeah, you just want some peace and rest.
And if you go to a religion that actually where this is not a controversy, where nobody's arguing with you, that can be some peace and rest for you.
Yeah, I can.
All right, well, we need to start wrapping up this show. We are going to, though, go on to our After Dark podcast, but for right now, Reverend Atteberry, can you tell us how people can get a hold of you online?
My website is at shawnaatteberry.com, SHAWNAATTE, B as in boy, ERRY. And that's where you can find my lovely book to purchase as well, which is on the women in the Bible.
And it's a great book. It's a great book. And you are available for speaking engagements, I do believe.
Yes, I am. Right. And there's more information about that on my website.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for being on the show. And we do have a question for those folks out there, and particularly if you are a woman. If you are part of a Gnostic or other alternative faith, did you have a mainstream religious background? And if you did sexism play a part in your decision to join a non-mainstream faith? Just a question, throw that out there. Obviously, men, you're welcome to participate in the comments section as well. And if you want to talk to, if you know some women who might want to chime on in, send them on over. I'd like to hear what other people have to say about this topic. Now, if you've enjoyed our show and you've found it helpful, you can help support us at Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding system that allows you to sponsor Gnostic NYC, the producer of this program, by pledging so much per video or podcast. You can cap the amount of money you spend each month so you don't get a surprise at the end of the month. And every penny goes directly to support the development of this and other programs. If you'd like to participate, you can visit Patreon, Patreon.com/Gnostic, and make your pledge there. And again, don't forget about our Talk Gnosis After Dark podcast, where we will discuss this topic in more detail. If you are a Patreon supporter, you do get to sit in on the podcast taping. Otherwise, the podcast should be up in about 3 to 7 days for you to listen to. And you can listen to it on iTunes, on Stitcher, or you can actually go to talkgnosis.gnosticnyc.com and download it there through an RSS feed. Again, we do appreciate your joining us for the show. We do appreciate your feedback, so you can find us online at Facebook, and feel free to like our page there. You can make comments under our YouTube videos, and you can also send us an email at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. So again, thank you very much for joining us, Reverend Shawna, and thank you, viewers, for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon and see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.